Welcome to another week of the Get Unhooked for Families coaching call. I'm Jason Coombs. So excited. This weekend happens to be the 4th of July, Independence Day. I always like to think about the independence that we get from the freedom of addiction and the freedom of self-hatred and the chains. So when I celebrate Independence Day, I think about those kinds of things. Um, and of course, I'm grateful for my country, servicemen and women, and all those wonderful things. But from that standpoint, I wanted to uh, piggyback off of a conversation that we had in last week's coaching call, which wasn't recorded. So those of you that are watching it recorded, sometimes we just have a support meeting and we don't record it. And that way, all the participants can unmute themselves, ask questions, and Jennifer and I field those questions as best as we can. And sometimes I do more of a lecture style. Lecture is a very poor choice of words, more instructional, deep diving into Unhooked and some of the principles there. And so last week, one of the things that we talked about was expectation management and not getting caught in the thickness of thin things. And so I want to build on that. And before I do, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jennifer Chase. She's also the operations director at Brickhouse Recovery. Jennifer Chase, what are you doing for your Independence Day weekend?
Well, let me just say that I have dual citizenship I was born in London, England. And so I actually, on Independence Day, wear a sweat or a tank top that my husband bought me that says Happy Treason Day. Just obviously I don't feel that way, but yeah, the Independence Day for me is my daughter is coming home from Texas, and really just the ability to have some really good family time. So um, this Independence Day for me, as Jason talked about, has changed since I have gotten sober. As I'm watching oftentimes over a lake some fireworks, and I have pictures in my phone just about it's really a moment that I feel God in a way that I sometimes, on every day don't feel. It's an amazing holiday. I love it so much, and I just look forward to spending time with my family.
I love it. My family and I are going to be a hop, skip, and a jump away from you up at the Payette Lake. You'll be at Cascade Lake. And so hopefully we'll run into you guys at a restaurant or something. I plan to do a lot of meditation myself on the beach and some early morning swims. I'm training for another triathlon, so I'm going to throw on the wetsuit and go out. Probably bring my buddy Zach. He can paddleboard next to me to make sure I don't sink, and go on some mountain bike rides and just really unplug and then watch the fireworks over the lake. I just love Idaho. I just love it. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that was the sticker of Idaho, the shape of the state, and then it said full in the middle. It says Idaho's full, no vacancy, because it's one of the greatest secrets. Um, okay, so expectation management. What I would like to do is tee it up by sharing just a little bit about a little bit more about me. Those of you that have read Unhooked are familiar with my story. By the way, if you want to, those of you that are live on Zoom, if you want to adjust your screen, you can actually grab the bar and pull over the margins so that only half your screen is the slide, and then you can see me and or Jennifer on the other half instead of it being a little thumbnail. So that's a little trick, a little nugget. Um, when my mother discovered that her precious son was addicted to drugs and alcohol, she searched everywhere for resources and guidance for a spark of hope because she wasn't ready to confide in others. She wasn't interested in being judged by others, so she feared that. And my sweet and tender mother was desperate for tools that would actually drive measurable results. And she just couldn't find anything that made sense at the time. She researched websites. She found a mixed bag of mediocre suggestions and an array of conflicting opinions. Her seemingly endless search for help and guidance led her down a rabbit hole with no end in sight. All my mom wanted to feel was confidence in the face of being gaslighted or blamed by me. She wanted to feel inner strength without feeling like a victim to my addiction. She wanted to feel peace and hope without depression and anxiety. She just longed for the day that she could feel a sense that she was influencing me the right way. And hence, and gratefully, after years and years, my mother learned exactly what to do to help me the right way. Now, if I could only go back and have her watch this coaching call back then, would have saved her years and years of pain and struggling. A little bit about me that I don't share in the book. By the way, Jennifer, are you able to just see my little dancing spoon? Okay. Um, growing up, I was a sensitive boy. I felt every emotion deeply. I too had been mocked and teased for being chubby and that Lloyd Christmas Dumb and Dumber reference hairstyle. Um, I would be mocked for feeling too deeply and tears that surfaced too readily and for not being tough enough. So emotional sensitivity was my curse and insecurity was my constant companion. So one thing that I want to share, and I alluded to a lot of that in the book, but what I didn't go deep into, and I feel like I should do a revision of Unhooked and add some layers that would be applicable down the road in maybe Unhooked 2.0. And and that is that I have been diagnosed with some co-occurring disorders, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. And those diagnoses are general anxiety disorder, ADHD, mild depression, and I was recently diagnosed, as in like this year diagnosed with APD. Any of you know what APD is? APD is awesomeness pretend disorder. No, it is called, I just made that up. That was pretty pithy. It's actually auditory processing disorder. And so if you think about dyslexia of someone who has visual dyslexia, it's like audible or audio dyslexia, where the words and the sounds get garbled and jumbled. And so uh, I have a hard time retaining information that's presented orally. And it contributes, it manifests um, in adults and children as poor listening skills or poor reading comprehension or miscommunication that causes troubles with others. In fact, one of my wife's friends, her son, he's 6 years old, I think, 6 or 7, and he's just one of those children that is a bit of a challenge. And she just recently ran into Bryn and mentioned that he was diagnosed with APD. And Bryn was like, no way. My husband was just diagnosed with APD. And so oftentimes it gets misdiagnosed has ADHD or gets misdiagnosed as something else. And so that's a fun new addition to my mental cocktail. And I'm learning how to navigate a lot of this stuff. Okay, I want to share. Let me make sure my audio's on. I'm going to share a little video clip that I've never showed you guys before. Hang on. Bear with me. Bear with me, Jennifer. All right, here we go. So yeah, I wouldn't say that he represents my church very well, um, particularly some of the things that he said about it. But what I would like to highlight is that when this particular situation was going on in Utah, um, you guys remember that I can you okay, back. If you remember in Unhooked, um, the book starts with my car accident and then my coworker approaching me, and he was also a member of my church. And like that documentary, that's Drugs Inc., by the way. You can see it on Netflix. There's a lot of different episodes in different towns and stuff. But he said that in this particular community, pills that were prescribed by a doctor doesn't necessarily have to be prescribed by my doctor, fall into a gray area. And it's one of those areas of justification for a lot of people. And so that led me into the state's largest oxycontin drug ring. And just to show back to the visual, I'd like to just show you. Let me jump ahead. So this is the actual org chart of the Oxy ring. So you can see it's set up like a multi-level marketing company with the doctor at the top, with his administrative staff, and then down here is me, and my coworker is right above me. And this operation was ultimately dismantled, but this is how I got really hooked into dependency on opiates. And this is also when he was indicted on 83 felony counts. More arrests were to be made. What's interesting about this is the news story broke on the very television station that I worked for. And so that's not ironic, is it? And so um, as you recall, I'm water skiing across a lot of content here. If you haven't read Unhooked, I encourage you to go back through. But I ended up heading out to the streets of Salt Lake, and recently I drove my twins down this street that I lived on because I wanted them to learn a little bit about these beautiful people and share a little bit about my life. And there are a lot of good people that are homeless, a lot of beautiful souls who have mental illness and who have substance use disorder. And so I'm trying to teach my kids young to have a lot of compassion and empathy for those that are less fortunate or that are going through struggles. And 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 someday when it makes sense, I will share my full story with my twins. They're a little young to comprehend right now, or at least that's what I'm telling myself. And then as the consequences, the natural consequences of my actions caught up with me, I ended up incarcerated multiple times, put into drug court, couldn't stay sober, so they continued to lock me up. And this process really, really hardened me. So as we go through the stages of change, I want to just identify the stages of pre-contemplation and contemplation here. The pre-contemplation was my drug use in high school. It was more of dabbling, my drinking in high school and in college. And then after the car accident and working with this doctor, that is really where the contemplation stage began, because natural consequences started to arise. And my parents kept me in contemplation longer than needed. And that is where we tie in the metaphor of get off the beach. So as my parents were on the beach hollering at me, they were also paying my bills, and they were also bailing me out, paying for hotel rooms when I needed a hotel room. They were doing my laundry when I needed them to do my laundry, and so forth. And so, I needed money on my books when I was in jail. I needed money on my friends' books. I was trying to use my parents just like I had always done, and they would fall into it. And so I would like to share the next piece, which is my mom's perspective of this process through the stages of change. Jen, let me know if you can hear it. Hang on.
My son is an addict. When he told me that he was an addict, my first reaction were the words in my mind that said, "No, you're not." I can remember the scene. It was heartbreaking. He was sobbing on the floor like a child and trying to tell us that he was an addict, and my mind wouldn't let me think that. Jason was the cutest little boy. He was just a happy boy, and he had a sister just 2 years older, and they were best of friends. He was well-loved, well-liked. He was kind of a natural leader, and kids followed him. And sometimes when he got into mischief, they followed him into mischief. I think if I could talk to that mother who was young into addiction with a loved one, I would just calm her down and say, don't give up on that little glimmer of hope. All the help we were doing and everything we were trying to rescue him and save him and pay off Check City on bad checks that bounced, all of that was just adding to the sickness and the craziness and adding to the disease and allowing the disease to go on. I wished I'd learned earlier not to talk to him in accountability, like asking him questions with yes and no answers where he had to say, yes, I did that, no, I didn't do that. You try bargaining, and the bargaining about if you can do this and we'll do this, and I mean, you become so desperate, you make checklists for them. You write down little things you want them to do, and then you feel really good if somehow they'll tell you they have done it. But the truth is, lying is a symptom of the disease. I wish I could have gotten past my pain and my despair to have been able to reach out with a more understanding heart. He was suffering on a totally different level than I could appreciate until the years went on, and then you could appreciate a little bit of his suffering. What I knew well was what my suffering was. Mine was unbearable. And there isn't a day you don't wake up where you don't feel that there is a cloud that day is a cloudy day. And you get really good at when people say, how's your family? How's Jason? Changing the subject or just telling them, oh, great, and then moving on. As I began to read more and understand more, I realized that I was contributing. I was doing them unaware, but I was shaming him. And there were times that were not kind what I was doing. Things I wouldn't have even dreamed. They were not healthy things that we were doing in our family. I knew I wanted to change him. I didn't want to ever do anything that would hurt anyone in the family again. I look back and I realized that it wasn't my goal as a parent, or nor do I think it should have been my role to have produced a child step by step that would turn out like this, whatever his checklist was looking like in my book. But the most power I ever had over Jason and with Jason through this whole episode was love. And I think my role as a parent, whatever his journey was going to be on earth, and it has been a doozy, is to just walk with him and love him and encourage him and believe in him. Through recovery, I can see my son as a person that I didn't know was in there, because he not only is sober, he's embracing the principles of recovery, of kindness, of taking responsibility, of serving others, of making amends with people, all the wonderful principles that are there. And I look at Jason now and I can imagine, I couldn't have imagined that much joy for him. I couldn't have imagined that much freedom for him. If you don't have hope one day, just think of Jason's story and Jason's mother and take some of my hope and realize that miracles can happen.
Mom, if you are watching this, I love you. Isn't she amazing? And what was it that she said? What was it that she said that made all the difference? It was love. It was love. And everything that we are learning how to do is, in fact, learning how to love unconditionally, learning how to accept things that we cannot change through love, learning how to change the things that we can through self-love, and have some grace with ourselves and patience with ourselves, that sometimes we slobber our way through this. Most of the time we slobber our way through this. I still slobber my way through this with addicted loved ones that I'm trying to help. And on a daily basis, my whole goal, I should say, life is easier when I wake up in the morning and I ask God to direct my thinking and to direct my words and to direct my actions in relation to my addicted loved ones. The opposite, when I wake up and I just launch into the day and I'm run by fear and anxiety and rushing, I am much less effective. And I've learned that about myself. So why did I show you all this, and where am I going with it? Because we want to talk about not getting caught up in the thickness of thin things. But before I go into the next slide, I'd like to ask Jennifer Chase, from a mother's perspective, what does this bring up for you? What nuggets do you have to share on this?
Well, first of all, I'm watching Shauna be emotional, and I just want you to know that I see you and I feel you and I am like with you. I think what this brings up for me is I so often, when somebody says all you need is to love somebody, like what love used to look like for me, like I think from the beginning of being a mom is when a baby cries, you go get them. When they fall, you pick them up. When they're hungry and you don't have any food available, you buy them food. Like the idea of them being hungry or not feeling loved and appreciated by being held and needs being met, right? Like that's, I think, how we learn how to love a child. And then as this disease becomes what it is, oftentimes it feels like counterintuitive, because now all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out how to love somebody without the idea of rescuing them or picking them up in their crib when they're crying. And like it's something counterintuitive to what I originally thought being a mother was. And I think that that's the journey for those of us that have kids that walk this path, is like, how do I love them without rescuing them? How do I love them? How do they feel loved when I tell them that I cannot get them a hotel room? Like, how do I, at the end of the day, there is no doubt that he says to me, my mother loves me. Like, that's for me the path in all of this, like the figuring out how to do this in a way that is most helpful for him and that I'm not rescuing him. I listened to your mom's story, and it's I mean, it's everything that I think about all the time, right? Like, how can I love my son the way that he needs to be loved, so that I am not keeping him in pre-contemplation. I'm not keeping him in contemplation. And, you know, again, I think sometimes that's the struggle, is because it is counterintuitive to what we thought being a parent was originally. So in saying that, I just want those of you that have a child that suffer with this disease to know that if you're feeling that way, so am I. If you struggle with that, so am I. And again, I think I say this every week, but I'm just so grateful to be struggling with other people and not struggling by myself and thinking that I'm on an island and that I'm the only one that has pervertedly messed this up, right? That I've done it wrong. So I just, your mom's story is so powerful, and I'm so grateful that that your whole family has gone to a place of being able to share this and this experience and helped us learn through it. And I'm just super grateful. I think it's what I needed to hear today.
Thank you, Jennifer. By way of reminder, some of this is going to be review. But with that said, I think it's important to recall back to the stages of change and remember that this process is the process for any behavior change, not necessarily just addiction. And the stages of change model, remember, this is an evidence-based model that's used internationally around the world. And it was developed by Dr. James Prochaska and Dr. Carlo Di Clemente back in the 1970s. And it's been tested, it's been developed, and it's been refined. And this is the most widely used and accepted models in addiction treatment. So those stages you can easily put yourself into related to maybe diet and exercise, or maybe saving for your retirement, or maybe it's quitting smoking, or you know, a lot of different areas. Maybe it's writing a book. I went through these stages as I was going through the process of writing a book. There's a lot of work that happens before the action stage, right? And so as you take the stages of change and you place them in a particular area of life. And this graphic is the example of someone in early sobriety, what their life might consist of. But you can switch these labels around to a variety of different topics. But the point is, the graphic is to drive home the message that we're in different stages of change regarding different areas of our life. And we have to be able to manage expectations in and around the individual's lives. And so keep this in mind as we go to Unhooked. We're going to go to page, standby. We're going to go to page 55. Don't get caught in the thickness of thin things. Jennifer Chase, would you be willing to read, and then you can pass back to me and I can read. If there's any volunteers that want to read, we'd be happy to pass to you. So I'll just have you start, Jen. Just keep it safe.
Absolutely. Don't get caught in the thickness of thin things. Years ago, while working with a client and his family in our outpatient treatment center, Brickhouse Recovery, I had a breakthrough moment. Outpatient treatment involves intense attendance, but clients go home on evenings and weekends. This particular client, Chad, lived with his aunt and uncle while in treatment. Chad's Southern California style endeared me to him right out of the gates. His baggy skater clothes effectively covered his scrawny, emaciated body, and his stylish flat bill cap let his boyish hairstyle slightly cover his eyes, blocking any real eye contact. Chad was 25 years old but looked 17. When I began treating Chad, he truly didn't believe he had a problem with drugs. He was in the pre-contemplative stages of change, meaning he was not ready to quit using drugs, but was forced to get sober by a Santa Ana Department of Corrections. He was only meeting with me because he got arrested and was required to attend treatment and jump through some additional hoops to please his probation officer and his judge. It's accurate to say that his only motivation was external. And to be honest, that was where most addicted people start. Internal motivators help prepare the soil for an internal shift. In this fertile soil, a good seed can be planted, and if cultivated properly, will produce a real harvest of long-term sobriety, a new life. Days earlier, Chad boarded a plane in Santa Ana, California, and arrived in Boise, Idaho to live with his Aunt Julie while attending treatment. In addictions treatment, sometimes it can help to make a geographical change in order to create a distance between the addicted person's toxic playmates and playgrounds. I took Chad under my wing and was encouraged to see him begin to make great internal strides. In a matter of weeks, he attended every treatment appointment and group. He was punctual and began to open up about his deep internal struggles that caused the compulsion to get loaded on drugs. One afternoon, my client's aunt called. She was livid. In her words, Chad was, quote, acting like a junkie, unquote, after he came home from treatment every day. He reported that he was staying up all night, playing video games, sleeping in late, drinking enormous amounts of caffeine, smoking cigarettes, and continuing to dress like a, quote, drug dealer, a drug addict. To make things worse, he wouldn't get a job and become a productive member of society. She was at her wit's end because she expected him to be further along in his process. She had a lot to learn. After an earful, I validated her concerns. You're going through a lot. Can you tell me what your primary expectation was for your nephew, Chad, before you flew him up to Idaho? Absolutely, she said forcibly. We wanted him to get clean and sober. Great, I affirmed before she could start her rant again. You and I share the same goal. Chad has been sober for 60 days today. This is a huge success to be celebrated. I paused, then asked, have you celebrated this incredible victory with Chad yet? She was silent. Quote, starting today, I pleaded. How do you think it might influence Chad if you make each sobriety milestone the most important day of the century, more important than his birthday and Christmas? What would be his reaction if you made it a family celebration and showed him the entire family recognized the hundreds of hard battles fought and won? Each and every day clean is a monumental victory despite your valid concerns. Then I asked, how many treatment groups and individual sessions has he attended since he started our program? She remained silent. His attendance is 100%, I proudly reported. For a 25-year-old who was living on the streets of Costa Mesa with no structure in his life 2 short months ago, this is a huge victory. I further advocated that Chad was making great strides towards forward in the areas that would build his foundation and character. He was following all the Brick House rules and curriculum expectations. He was on time for assignments and presentations. He was expressing change talk, exploring his ambivalence, and wanting to stay sober long term. We'll get more on the change talk, what that looks like and sounds like soon. And the biggest miracle of all was that Chad expressed his emotion with tears flowing down his cheek in front of his peers the day prior to her call. Real connection was growing inside of him. What a victory. Jason, go ahead.
Aunt Julie wanted the best for Chad, but her unrealistic expectations were hurting both of them. Chad felt her pressure to be more than he could be. So he put up his walls and met her with passive-aggressive resistance. Each time this happened, she felt dismissed, disregarded, and her feelings of frustration and discouragement grew until the point when she called me in a rage. Clearly, Chad and anyone in early sobriety for that matter needed a lot of work in many areas of his life. His aunt would only focus on his shortcomings while completely ignoring the fact that Chad was in the action stage of change in many areas, especially in his commitment to staying clean and sober one day at a time. Furthermore, he was in the action stage regarding treatment requirements, attendance assignments, and therapy sessions. There was a lot to be encouraged about. During our conversation, Julie reflected on the need to readjust her expectations. She verbally recognized that she was getting stuck in the thickness of thin things. In Chad's case, there were more reasons to celebrate his progress than to be upset. It is unrealistic to expect that in 60 days, all of Chad's unwelcome behaviors she wanted fixed would suddenly change after he got sober. The truth was that she had set unreasonable expectations, which most family members do. It's okay. The key is that we become aware of them first and then we work on changing and adjusting them. Change is one of the most difficult tasks for any human being. We typically change in small increments in one or maybe 2 areas at a time. Parents and spouses often become as addicted to trying to rescue their loved one as their pain and consequences mount from their substance use. The first step for most parents and spouses is to get sober, quote, unquote, from worry and rescuing someone who is clearly not ready to change, and thereby showing your addicted loved one what sobriety looks like. If you are unhappy and sober, why would your loved one want your kind of life? Let me repeat that. If you are unhappy and sober, why would your loved one want your kind of life? Get your joy and peace back and show them what emotional sobriety and a calm, balanced life looks like, come what may. So I share that section with you, coupled with this graphic, to just review the importance of managing expectations. And Costa Mesa Chad, from a visual standpoint, was in the pre-contemplation or contemplation stage of change regarding cleanliness and hygiene. He was also in the pre-contemplation and contemplation stage of change regarding energy drinks and caffeine. Also smoking, vaping, chewing, and sponsorship, and debt and bills, he was in the pre-contemplation stage of change in those areas, maybe the contemplation stage. So he was especially in the pre-contemplation stage about getting a job. He didn't know how to get a job. That's why he wasn't going out and putting out resumes and applications. He didn't know how to do it. So expecting him to go out and do that was a setup for failure. Maybe he did know how to do it. Okay, let's just be the devil's advocate here. Maybe he did know how to do it, but he didn't have the self-efficacy to do it. He didn't have the confidence that he could be successful at it. And nobody likes to launch out to try something only to know that they're going to fail. And when you believe you will fail, you just stay paralyzed and you just don't try. So, as we wrap up today's coaching call, feel free to consider changing the headers or headings on each one of these domains to gambling, to sexual compulsivity, to compulsive overeating, to workaholism, to we got smoking on there. We got caffeine and energy drinks on there. To promiscuity, to lying, dishonesty. And then you add the stages of change inside those, and you begin to recognize the complexity that you have as an influencer to try to control where they're at in the stages of change in all of those areas. So celebrate the victories. Celebrate where they're at. Validate where they're at. Furthermore, shout out to Fight the New Drug. As you can see, I'm wearing a shirt that says, let me just stop my screen share real quick. I'm wearing a shirt that, oh, doesn't look like it wants to, there we go. That says porn kills love. Why do I wear this shirt? I get a lot of weird looks at the gym when I wear this shirt, but I don't care. Because what I have learned is that many men and women, particularly in early sobriety, struggle with sexual compulsivity and promiscuity and risky behaviors. And the porn industry capitalizes on this. And so I am a huge advocate of Fight the New Drug. And I am in recovery from sexual compulsivity. I share that openly. I share that when appropriate, out of respect for my my family and out of respect for others. But it is part of my platform. Yeah, I'm also in recovery for compulsive overeating. I was 275 pounds at one point after I got sober, and I have a unhealthy relationship with food unless I am working on it. But I didn't launch into recovery in all of those areas right when I got sober. You see, I didn't just get sober and then all of a sudden I'm in recovery for compulsive overeating, sexual compulsivity, workaholism. I didn't become honest right out of the gate. And so we have to manage our expectations when the process to change is cyclical and the process to change is sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 3 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps back. You know what I'm saying? Because it's this cyclical part. And remember, in the stages of change, relapse is one of those stages. Why is relapse a stage of change? A relapse, you could call it a setback because it applies to all behaviors. A setback helps resolve ambivalence. That's the benefit of a relapse. The cost of a relapse is the self-loathing, the self-hatred, and usually the natural consequences that come from that setback. But those also contribute to resolving one's ambivalence and one's internal motivation. And so I think that that serves its purpose oftentimes. I am glad that we talked about this today because I know some of you have reached out to me and are walking through very similar situations in terms of your own peace and serenity regarding where your addicted loved one is at in any particular life domain in their life. And so managing expectations, or better, making sure you're not getting caught in the thickness of thin things, helps you to let go and let God and trust God and let God do his work with your loved one. And then believe that there is grace and help in this life for your loved one and in the next, in the event that he never gets sober or never gets well, or she never gets sober or never gets well. But that there is a space held for this loved one by their loving creator where everything will be okay. Everything will. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Sometimes mortally, sometimes eternally. And that's the kind of faith we choose to have before the feelings of faith and trust come. We have to choose that first. And even if none of that's true, let's just be the devil's advocate again. Even if none of that's true, what I'm saying is not true. And we get to the other side of death and we're like, I was wrong, everything's wrong. Well, it still allows me to show up in a space of faith versus a space of fear, because I am not a very good influencer when I'm nervous and I'm anxious and I'm trying to force an outcome. I'm much more influential when I can just detach from the outcome. We have a huge weekend, in closing, we have a huge weekend right now where our clients are going to have 4 days where they're not going to be in groups, they're not going to be in doing testing. So as a staff, we can either choose to be detectives and investigate and make sure they check in every day and make sure that they stay sober all weekend and really get in that space, all the while our families are enjoying the holiday while we're focusing on our clients. Or we can choose faith, put them in the care of God, and enjoy our weekends with our families and re-up on our own emotional sobriety and let go, knowing that on Tuesday morning when Jennifer comes back to work, we will have a host of relapses to navigate. It's part of the deal. Sounds like drug and alcohol treatment to me. You know what I mean? Like, my expectation that everybody's going to stay sober this weekend is unrealistic. My expectation is that a lot of ambivalence will hopefully be resolved through pain and natural consequences and through positive experiences for people that do choose to practice their treatment and recovery skills. Either way, it's not up to me and it's none of my business. Either way, I'm going to have a killer weekend with my family. And either way, I'm going to get sober. Either way, I plan to get sober. I am sober, guys, I promise. Either way, I'm going to stay sober and I'm going to work on my emotional sobriety. Either way, whether they fall off or whether they don't. I got enough fish to fry that are bigger that I need to focus on within myself and in my life. So that's what I'm going to choose to do. Happy Independence Day weekend. And thank you for your time, you guys. Jennifer, any final thoughts? I know you got a jam, but I always like to open it up to you as we wrap.
I just want everybody to know that everybody will be in my thoughts and prayers over this weekend. And Jason's right. Like sometimes these long holidays create a opportunity to work through some ambivalence. And I just pray that everybody can have a mind shift and look at relapse and struggles in just the way that he's laying out today, right? It's not a failure. It's an opportunity to work through some of the stages of change and to work through some ambivalence. And you guys are loved, and I pray that you have a fulfilling 4th of July.
Thank you. Happy Independence, you guys. Love you. We will see you again next week. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.